She had been feeding 12 men for 11 weeks before she learned his name. She knew the others within the first 3 days. Men who eat together at a long table 3 times a day in close quarters make themselves known whether they intend to or not, by the speed at which they reach for the bread, by what they say when something is good and what they say when something is not, by the particular way each man holds his coffee cup and whether he drains it or nurses it. Nettie Farrow had been cooking for crews since she was 19 years old, and she read men the way a farmer reads weather, not by any single sign, but by the accumulation of them, and she was rarely wrong. She knew Dix Olson was the foreman by the way the others passed things to him first and watched him before they spoke. She knew Cale and Peter Dahl were brothers by the way they argued, which was the way of people who have been disagreeing about the same things for so long that the argument has become a form of affection. She knew that the young hand called Rabbit was homesick because he ate fast and then looked at the window, and she made him a molasses cake on his birthday, which she knew because she had asked Dix without Rabbit hearing, and Rabbit had eaten 2 pieces and thanked her in a voice that was not entirely steady. She knew all of this. She did not know the quiet man. There was nothing to mark him as different in the first week. She had learned to look for the marks, the man who lingered to speak to her after the others had gone, the man who watched the serving dish in a calculating way, the man who ate too fast or too slow or in a manner that told you he was not comfortable in company. She looked for all of these and filed what she found. She found nothing in him that put her on guard and nothing that put her at ease either. He was simply a man who gave her very little to work with, which was unusual enough that she noted it. He came in last to every meal. He took what was left without comment, which was always enough because she cooked for 14 and fed 12. He did not sit at the head of the table or the foot. He sat in the middle on the bench side, the same spot every time, with whatever man happened to sit down first on either side of him, and he ate with the unhurried focus of someone who was not in a hurry and was not performing the not hurrying. When the meal was done, he stacked his own plate and cup at the end of the table, nearest the kitchen door, which no one else did. She had noticed this before she noticed anything else about him. His name, as far as she knew from hearing the others use it, was Marsh. She had assumed he was a hand. A senior hand, perhaps, given his age, which she put it somewhere past 40, and given the way the others were around him, not deferential exactly, more like comfortable. The ease of men around someone who does not require anything of them. He did not give orders. He did not tell stories. He listened to the stories other men told, and occasionally said a thing that was short and specific, and the other men received it and adjusted and moved on. She had been cooking for 11 weeks and feeding this man last every day, and she did not know he owned the land she was standing on, the barn she could see from the kitchen window, the cattle on the hill, the house around her, and the terms of her own employment. She found this out on a Tuesday in February in the town of Granger at the land office, where she had gone to post a letter and had waited at the counter while the agent finished a transaction with another customer, and had looked, the way she always looked at things when there was nothing else to do, at the map of filed claims on the wall. It was a large map, the county in neat sections, each one labeled with the name on the filing. She had been looking at it the way you look at a thing that is there and interesting when she found the section that contained the Alderman Creek operation, tracing the creek line with her eye until she found the right acreage, the right road. The name above the section was not Alderman. It was not the name of anyone she had heard the crew mention. It was not a name she recognized from any conversation in 11 weeks of breakfasts and suppers and the particular way that men talk when they are warm and fed and comfortable. The name was E. Marsh. She stood at the land office counter with her letter still in her hand, and she looked at that name for a considerable time. The land agent finished his transaction and looked at her, and she said she was just looking at the map, and he said it was a fine map, and she agreed and paid for her posting and walked out. She drove the 7 miles back to the ranch in the February cold and thought about every meal she had cooked since November, and about the man who had eaten last at every one of them, and about what it meant that no one had told her. She had come to the Alderman Creek operation because she needed the work and because Dix Olson was a man she had cooked for twice before on other outfits, and she trusted his word, which was that the place was well run, the crew was decent, and the cook's wage was the best he had seen offered in Holt County that fall. She had asked who owned the operation, and he had said a man named Marsh. Eastern money, good for it, didn't interfere with how the ranch was run. She had filed this away without interest. Owners were not, in her experience, a factor in the daily work of a cook's kitchen. You cooked for the crew. The crew ate. The owner was an abstraction that expressed itself in the quality of the provisions and the condition of the stove, and otherwise left you to do your job. She was 31 years old, and she had been cooking for ranch crews and trail outfits since her second year in Nebraska. First because she needed the income, and then because she was very good at it, and because the work, while hard and unrelenting, had a clear and satisfying shape to it. You fed people. They were fed. You did it again tomorrow. There was no ambiguity in it. You either had enough bread for the morning, or you did not. Either the stew was right or it wasn't, and if it wasn't, you knew why, and you fixed it. The problems were real, and so were the solutions, and both were knowable, which was more than she had been able to say about most things in the years before she started cooking for crews. After 3 years of a marriage that had been full of things that were impossible to get clear, Frank Farrow's moods, his disappearances, the particular kind of uncertainty that comes from living with someone who is kind sometimes and not kind other times, and you can never tell which it will be before morning, she had come to value the clarity of a kitchen the way she valued clean water and level ground. She had not understood, while she was inside that marriage, what she was managing. She had understood it very clearly afterward. She had been a widow for 2 years. Frank had not died badly. He had died in an accident at the mill, swift and clean, no one's fault. And he had left behind no bitterness, and no debt, and no children. Only the fact of his absence, and the question of what she was going to do with the rest of her life. She had answered that question by picking up her good knives and her 2 enameled pots and the recipe ledger she had been keeping since she was 12 years old, and she had gone to work. The work had been steady. The work had been enough. She did not want for much. She had her skills and her tools and her wages, which she kept in a tin box under the floorboard of whatever room she occupied on whatever outfit she was working. She had her ledger and her opinions about bread. She had learned to sleep well in any kitchen and to find the character of a stove by the 3rd day and to keep a crew of 12 fed and adequately content through any kind of winter without losing her temper or her standards. She was not lonely in the way some women were lonely, with a specific and nameable shape to it. She was sometimes alone in a way she noticed, but she had learned to manage it the same way she managed a stove that ran hot on one side, work around it, compensate where you have to, do not spend time wishing it were otherwise. She was managing fine. She had not expected the quiet man. She had not, if she was honest with herself, been expecting anyone. She had not expected him, and she had not sought him out, and she would have said, if anyone had asked, that she had no particular opinion about him beyond the professional assessment that he was one of the easier men to cook for. Because he ate what was put in front of him without commentary and cleaned up after himself. This was what she would have said, and it was true as far as it went, which was not very far. The longer truth was that she had been watching him since the 3rd week in the way she watched things she could not yet explain to herself. He worked the same as the other men, out at first light, back at dusk, putting in the same hours on the fence line and in the corrals as anyone on the place. She had assumed a man of his apparent seniority would direct rather than do. He did not. She could see him from the kitchen window on clear mornings, moving the same as the others, unhurried, no different to look at except that he was older and quieter, and when something went wrong with a piece of equipment or an animal, he was the one the others turned toward without being told. He did not tell them what to do. He looked at the problem, and they waited, and then he said a thing, and they did it, and the problem was generally addressed. This was a particular kind of authority, the kind that does not require volume, and she recognized it because it was the same kind she used in a kitchen and was the only kind she had any use for. He was careful with the animals in a way she noticed because she noticed such things. She had seen him stop on his way to the barn one morning to check the near hind leg of a horse that had been moving oddly the day before, not because he was asked to, not because anyone was watching, but because the horse had been moving oddly and the leg needed checking. He stood for 5 minutes in the cold with the hoof in his hands, working his fingers around the coronet band, feeling for heat the way you did it when you were not guessing. Then he set the hoof down and went on about his business without saying a word to anyone. She had turned back to her stove. She had thought, that is a man who pays attention to what needs attention and does not need to be seen doing it. She had thought this and then gone back to her bread dough and not thought about it any more, or told herself she had not. The cold in December was serious, the kind that came down from the north on 3 days' warning and did not apologize. She stayed up until 2 a.m. on the worst of it, keeping the kitchen stove fed so the pipe wouldn't freeze and crack. It was her pipe and her kitchen and her problem, and she handled it the same way she handled all her problems, which was directly and without announcing it. At midnight she heard boots on the porch and the back door opened, and he came in from the dark with his coat rimed with frost and his breath making a cloud, and he stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at her by the stove. "Go to bed," he said. "I'll watch the pipe." She said she was fine. "You have to cook breakfast in 5 hours," he said. "Go to bed." She had looked at him for a moment. He was not asking. He was not ordering. He was simply stating a fact and its consequence, which was what she did when she needed something done in her kitchen, and so she understood it. She went to bed. When she came down at 4:30, the pipe was intact. The stove had been banked with exactly the right amount of fuel to hold until morning, and the wood box beside it had been filled. It had not been full when she went up. She stood in the dark kitchen and held that knowledge and did nothing with it except put the coffee on. In January, he came in on a Sunday for the water bucket while the crew was off and she was doing the week's bread alone. He filled the bucket at the pump in the lean-to, and on his way back through, he slowed at the kitchen door and looked at the 6 loaves cooling on the board, brown and even, properly done, the crust set right. "That's good bread," he said. "I know," she said. She heard it in the corner of his mouth before she saw it, the sound of a man almost smiling. She did not look up from her dough until after he had gone. She thought about it later, when she ought to have been thinking about other things, and then she stopped thinking about it and went to sleep, and in the morning she got up and put the coffee on and cooked breakfast for 12 men and did her work, which was what she always did and what she was good at and what she had always found to be sufficient. She found it slightly less sufficient than usual that morning. She noted this and set it aside. On the Thursday after she found out, she watched him come in to supper last, the same as always, and take his bench seat in the middle and eat the venison stew she had made from the haunch Dix had brought in on Tuesday. He ate the same way he always ate, unhurried, attentive to the food in the way of a man who respects it without making a ceremony of it. He did not know she was watching him any differently than she had been watching him for weeks, and nothing in her face told him so. because she had been managing her face in kitchens for 12 years, and it did not give things away that she did not choose to give. She thought about the name on the land office wall. She thought about the way he had said the thing about the cook stove burner being wrong since October, which meant he had known about it before she arrived, which meant he had been watching her adjust for it and had said nothing. The same as he said nothing about most things he noticed. She thought about Dix, who had worked for this man before and knew exactly who he was and had eaten 1,200 meals in the same room with her and never once offered the information that the quiet hand in the middle of the bench owned everything they were sitting on. She would talk to Dix about that. She thought about the map on the land office wall and the clean block letters of the official filing and what it meant to be on a man's land for 11 weeks without knowing it was his. She thought about all of this for 2 more days. She was not a woman who acted before she had thought a thing through, and this required thorough thinking. On Saturday morning, when the crew was out and the kitchen was hers, she heard him come in from the barn and stop at the pump in the lean and then come to the kitchen doorway, and she turned from the stove and looked at him directly. "Sit down," she said. He sat down. He did not ask why. She thought, of course he doesn't ask why. He is a man who waits to see what a thing is before he responds to it. She poured 2 cups of coffee and brought them to the table and sat across from him and set the cups down and looked at him. "I went to the land office in Granger on Tuesday," she said. He was still. "I was posting a letter," she said. "I looked at the map on the wall. It's the kind of map I always look at." She held his eyes. Marsh, Alderman Creek section. 280 acres, filed 1874. He looked at his coffee cup. Then, back at her. He did not say it wasn't him. He did not offer an explanation. He simply sat with it, the way she had sat with it since Tuesday, and let it be what it was. "Why didn't you tell me?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. Not constructing an answer, she could tell the difference by now between a man who was deciding what to say and a man who was deciding how to say what was true. "Because I wanted you to know what the work was," he said, "before you knew who was asking you to do it." She looked at him. "I've hired cooks who knew who I was," he said. "They cook for the owner. They watch what I take second helpings of and they make it again. They ask me about the food." He looked at the table. "You cooked for the crew. You learned Rabbit's birthday. You stayed up all night for the pipe." He looked up. "I didn't want you to do any of that for me. I wanted to see what you did when no one particular was watching." "And," she said. "And I've been watching for 11 weeks, he said. "And you're the same at 6 in the morning with 12 hungry men as you are on a Sunday afternoon when no one's in the kitchen. That's not a common thing." Nettie looked at him across the table in the winter kitchen with the coffee between them and the sound of the wind at the corner of the house, and thought about 11 weeks of feeding this man last and watching him check a horse's leg in the cold without being asked and not thinking. Too hard about any of it. "You could have told me after the first week," she said. "I could have," he said. "I didn't want to." "Why?" He looked at her for a long moment. The kind of long that says the answer is not complicated, but costs something. "Because you looked at me like I was just another man at the table," he said. "And I haven't been looked at that way in a long time." She held that. She turned her coffee cup a quarter turn with one finger, the way she did when she was thinking. She had cooked for this man for 11 weeks, and she had not known who he was, and he had known who she was and what she was worth. And he had said nothing, and sat last, and eaten what was left, and watched. And she was sitting across from him now with the full information in front of her, and she was trying to decide if what she felt about that was anger. It was not anger, she found. It was something more complicated. It was the feeling of being seen clearly by someone who had not announced the seeing, which was both more intimate and more frightening than being seen by someone who had asked permission first. She picked up her coffee cup. "The bread," she said. He looked at her. "In January," she said. "You said it was good bread." "It was," he said. "I know," she said. "I made it." She set the cup down. "I want you to understand something. I cooked for your crew the same way I cook for every crew, because that is what I do and who I am, and it has nothing to do with who owns the land I'm standing on. If you'd told me in November, I would have cooked the same food the same way. You didn't need to hide it to find that out." He was very still. "But," she said. He waited. "I understand why you did," she said, "and I'm not going to pretend I don't." He looked at her carefully. The same way he had looked at the horse's hind leg in the cold, taking account of something that needed accurate assessment. "I'd like to know your name," he said. "Your full name." "Nettie Farrow," she said. "Eleonora, if you need the whole of it. No one uses it." "Eleonora," he said. He said it as if he were testing the weight of it. "Don't," she said. The corner of his mouth moved, the same way it had moved in January over the bread. This time, she saw the whole of it. "Marsh," she said. "What does the E stand for?" "Edwin," he said. "Edwin Marsh," she said. She looked at him across the table, this man she had fed last for 11 weeks. This man who had banked her stove at midnight and said nothing about it. That's a lot of name for a man who sits in the middle of the bench. "I've found the middle of the bench suits me," he said. She looked at him a moment longer. Then she stood and picked up her coffee cup and his and took them to the washbasin, and she stood at the basin and looked out the window at the Alderman Creek land in the February light. The snow on the hills and the cattle on the far slope and the barn he had built or bought and the fence line she could see from here that he had worked on himself in November alongside his own hired hands. She turned. "Stay for dinner," she said. "Sit wherever you like." Something settled in his face that had not been settled before. She saw it and understood it and turned back to the stove before she said anything else about it. He sat at the head of the table for the first time that evening, and the crew received this without comment, the way crews receive most things that have shifted without announcement. They noticed and adjusted and went on eating. Dix caught her eye from the far end of the table with an expression that contained the question he was not going to ask, and she gave him the look that meant she knew, and he could let it alone, and he did. Rabbit, who was closest to the kitchen door and therefore knew her best, looked at her once and then at Marsh and then at his stew, and applied himself to it with the focused satisfaction of a young man who has watched something arrive that he was hoping would arrive. After the meal, when the crew had gone to the bunkhouse and the kitchen was hers again, Edwin Marsh helped her clear the table. She had not asked him. She was not surprised. They worked through it in the lamp-lit quiet of a winter evening, the wind working at the window and the stove ticking down from supper heat. She washed, and he dried, which no man had done in her kitchen in the 11 weeks she'd been there. He was not clumsy about it. He had clearly dried dishes before and understood the purpose of a drying cloth and how to set a stacked plate so it would not tip. She noticed this without commenting on it. She thought about all the things she could say and chose the ones that were worth saying. "You hired me through Dix," she said. "I did. He'd worked for me before. I asked him if he knew a cook. And he said there was a woman named Nettie Farrow who was the best cook he'd worked under and who would not put up with nonsense and who always had enough bread. He set a plate on the stack. That was the recommendation. In that order, he left out the enough bread part when he offered me the position," she said. "He probably thought it would seem like a low bar." "It's not a low bar," she said. "Enough bread for 12 men through a Nebraska winter is never a low bar." "No," he said, "it isn't." She handed him the last cup. He dried it and set it with the others and folded the drying cloth and laid it over the rack the way she had shown no one, and he had simply observed and done without being told, the same as he did everything. She had been watching him observe and do things for 11 weeks. She was used to it by now. She was more used to it than she had intended to be, which was itself a thing worth noting. "I'll be moving on in April," she said, "when the spring crews come. That's the arrangement." He was quiet. "Unless," she said. She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. She was a woman who did not say things past where they needed to be said, and this one had landed. He looked at her in the lamplight of his own kitchen. This man who had sat last at his own table for 11 weeks so he could watch a woman do her work without the work being changed by the watching. "Unless," he said. The winter wind moved at the corner of the house. The lamp held steady between them. She set down the washbasin cloth. "I make the same bread every week," she said. "I'm not going to change it because you like it." "I know," he said, "and I'll tell you when the stove needs adjusting, and I won't ask permission first. I wouldn't expect you to." She nodded. She looked at the kitchen, the clean table, the stacked plates, the window with the February dark behind it, and the lamp's small, steady light caught in the glass. "It's a good kitchen," she said. "It needs a better cook stove," he said. "The right rear burner has been wrong since October." She turned and looked at him. "I noticed that on the second day." "I know." He looked at the stove with the quiet expression of a man making a note he intends to act on. "I'll have it replaced before April." She looked at him. She looked at the kitchen, at the window, and the dark beyond it, and the hills where his cattle were, and the barn he had built, and the fence line he had worked himself in November with the rest of his crew because it needed doing. "April," she said, "may not be necessary." She went to bank the stove for the night. He held the lamp so she could see, and the kitchen was warm, and the winter was still some weeks from done. And neither of them said anything further about it, because they were both people who understood when enough had been said, and when saying more would only diminish what was already standing between them. The stove held the heat well into the night. She had learned in November exactly how to bank it for that, and she had not needed to be told.